DND number 2, Suffer the Children in Jesus' Name, Chapter 16. Caroline, get up, please, Sherry begged. She shook Caroline again, poured more water into the cloth in her hand, and wiped Caroline's face. It was a drop of the water running into Caroline's mouth that brought her out of her semi-conscious state. Slowly she opened her eyes and licked her lips. Man, Caroline, you had me worried. I couldn't get you to wake up. Here, sit up. She pulled Caroline to a sitting position and continued wiping her face with the cloth. Water, please, Sherry, just give me some water. Raising her eyebrow, Sherry held the bottle to Caroline's lips. Caroline's tongue flicked out to taste the cool water. Slowly, she was able to take several swallows before Sherry took the bottle away. She set the bottle down and lifted the cloth to finish cleaning Caroline's face. She spoke casually as she worked. I saw your boyfriend last night. You did? Caroline croaked, trying to sit up straighter. Uh-huh. He was on the stairs last night when I got back up there. He saw me come out of the apartment. Caroline tried to clear her throat. Did he say anything to you? Yeah. He said he wanted to check out the apartment to see why I was in there in the middle of the night, and I let him. I knew he wouldn't find our secret door. Me and you are the only ones who know about it. I guess that sort of makes us special, huh? Yeah, special, Caroline said weakly. Sherry moved down to clean Caroline's neck and chest. She bit her lip as she rubbed the cloth over the parched skin. I brought your clothes. Caroline didn't answer. She felt like crying, only she was so dehydrated she had no tears. She was afraid to believe that Sherry really would let her out. She thought she'd never see Toby again, and now, seeing him might be just minutes away. She was fearful it was too good to be true, afraid Sherry might change her mind. Let's see now, Sherry said, placing her finger under her chin. How am I going to get you dressed? It would be easier if you could stand. Can you stand, Caroline? She nodded. I think I can. I'm going to have to eventually, unless you plan to carry me up those stairs. I can stand, if you help me. Sherry struggled to help Caroline to her feet. Wow, you're light as a feather. I bet you've lost 10 pounds in these past few days. I bet you're going to have a big old McDonald's hamburger tonight and a chocolate shake, huh? I just might. Okay, I'm going to lean you here against the wall. Can you stand right here while I get your clothes? Caroline nodded, standing shakily against the wall. Standing made her immediately nauseated, but she didn't care. Sherry turned to grab Caroline's jeans from the doorknob where she'd hung them. She retrieved the jeans and came to kneel before Caroline to help her. But as she knelt, the gun she had stuffed in the waistband of her own jeans got in her way. She pulled the gun out and eyed Caroline. I don't think I need this anymore, do you? Caroline bit her lip and shook her head. Good, Sherry said, smiling. She tossed the gun over onto the mattress. The loud blast startled them both. Eyes wide, mouths gaping, they stared at each other. But it was Caroline who began to slide down the wall. Her side was on fire. She grabbed at the hole where blood oozed from under her fingers. She looked back up at Sherry, terrified. Sherry, Caroline gasped. Sherry, what have you done? Sherry stood, her mouth open, the surprised look on her face telling it all. I didn't mean to. I swear, Caroline, it was an accident. Caroline slipped to the floor, her shoulders leaning against the wall. She drew in a ragged breath. Sherry, listen to me, Caroline said quickly, knowing she had very little time before she lost consciousness. You have to go for help. You have to go right now and get help. I didn't mean to do it, Sherry cried. Caroline groaned with the pain. I know, but you have to get me help now. If you don't, I'll die. I can't. I can't go now. I'll be in trouble. Sherry, please, Caroline sobbed. If I die, they'll eventually find me, and then you really will be in trouble. You have to go for help now. If you do, they'll know that it was an accident and that you tried to help. Now go, Sherry. I can't hold on much longer. If you go now and get me help, I'll be able to tell them how it was an accident. Okay, Sherry said, finally making the decision. Okay, I'm going right now. Promise me, Sherry. Promise me you'll bring me help. I promise, she said solemnly. Good girl, Caroline said softly, and her eyes closed. New scene. Toby leaned on the car that pulled up to the curb. Hello, detectives. Summer smiled. Toby, heard you went roaming last night. I couldn't sleep, Toby explained. What are we going to do to find Caroline? Did you recanvass the building? Did anyone hear a gunshot Saturday morning? Lieutenant Veranda leaned across. Several people did, but no one was concerned enough to report it. The lady upstairs said she'd be calling the police every few minutes if she reported every strange sound coming through the walls. He waved his hand. Get in, Toby. Where are we headed? Toby asked as they drove away. A pawn shop near Caroline's apartment. We're going to try to trace the gun. Were you able to find out who called the hotel pretending to be Caroline? Not yet. Got a warrant to pull the phone records and should have that information in a few hours. As they approached the corner, Lieutenant Veranza's cell phone rang. Yeah, Veranza, he answered. Lieutenant? He sat up straighter. Sherry? Sherry, slow down. I didn't mean to do it. You didn't mean to do what, Sherry? What did you do? Oh man, I shot her. She needs help now. She needs help right now. Are you at the apartment? Yes. Yes, you have to hurry. Lieutenant Veranza put his hand over the phone and motioned to his partner. Get the EMTs over there now. He whipped a U-turn and glanced at Toby. Easy now. We're going to make this right, he said to both the girl on the phone and the man in the back seat. Sergeant Summers grabbed the radio while Toby's fingers dug into the seat. Sherry, I'm in the car. I'm close by. Meet me out front so you can take me to her right away, okay? Okay, she agreed. I gotta hang up. No, Sherry, wait. Damn. Sirens blaring, they screeched to a halt in front of the building. The three men sprang from the car as Sherry stood on the porch, waving madly. She grabbed Lieutenant Veranza's hand and pulled him down the hall to the vacant apartment, while Toby and Sergeant Summers followed right behind. When Sherry went inside the closet and pushed the wall out, they began to understand just how close they'd been to finding Caroline. So close, and yet so far. She'd been right under their noses. They flew down the steps and looked to the open door on the far right wall. Caroline's body lay sprawled on the concrete floor, her shoulders leaning against the block wall. Blood seeped from a wound in her side, and Veranza and Summers knelt down to see what could be done, ready to perform CPR if necessary. Lieutenant Veranza found a pulse in her neck. She's alive, he said breathlessly. Toby fell by her side. Caroline, he sobbed. Caroline, can you hear me, baby? For just a moment, the room fell silent as if they expected an answer. Sergeant Summers ran upstairs to guide the paramedics down to the hidden room. Toby took Caroline's blood-covered hand and stroked her cheek. Live for me, he whispered. Live for me. I was trying to get her dressed, Sherry began to explain. It was an accident. Toby looked slowly up in the young girl's direction, his eyes focusing on her. Lieutenant Veranza leapt to his feet and grabbed Sherry and pulled her out of the room. Toby turned back to Caroline. Don't you leave me, he prayed. Don't you dare leave me. I promise. I'll never let you out of my sight again. Never. Just come back to me. Sir, we need to take care of her now. Toby looked up to find an EMT gently addressing him. He looked directly into the young man's eyes. Help her, please. Don't let her die. We'll do our best, he said as he ushered Toby aside. Toby stood and watched over their shoulders as they worked to stabilize her, paced as they hooked up an IV, banged his forehead against a wall as they attached small electrodes to her chest. Why are you doing that? Is something wrong with her heart? He asked. Well, she's severely dehydrated, and along with the loss of blood, her heart has a chance of stopping, and we just want to be ready for that, for the worst. He nodded, breathing deeply, running his hand through his hair. Lieutenant Veranza joined him, asking the paramedics about her condition. The man glanced nervously at Toby before he gave a shake of his head to the detective. She's lost a lot of blood. Her pupils are not reactive. She's taken quite a knock on the back of her head. Her condition is serious, maybe critical. Toby's face paled. He slid down the wall onto his haunches and began to pray. It seemed forever before they lifted the stretcher to carry her out to the waiting ambulance. Ride with me, Toby, Lieutenant Veranza said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Toby watched as they lifted the stretcher and started up the steep stairwell. In shock, he turned, looking over the room that had been her prison. Slowly, his eyes moved around the room while Lieutenant Verranza ordered the room sealed. He used his pen to lift the gun from the mattress and nodded at an officer. And bag this. Both Toby and the lieutenant noticed the writing scratched into the floor at the same time. Toby read it slowly, carefully. He lifted his head and met Lieutenant Verranza's eyes. Come on, let's get you to the hospital. When she wakes up, she'll want to see you. At the hospital, the doctor spoke as he quickly examined the patient. Looks like the bullet took a clean ride through her side. No organs, no arteries, no bones. She's very lucky. Toby only grunted in response to that statement. He watched as they worked on his beloved, his eyes never leaving her face. If she opened her eyes, he wanted her to know he was there. He remained at her side, Lieutenant Verranza, surprisingly, at his side. He knew he wouldn't have been allowed to stay if she'd been taken into surgery, and the fact that they'd been able to work on her right there in one of the small emergency treatment rooms told him she would be okay. But he was worried again when he heard them speaking about a head injury, something about brain surgery, and he scowled as they wheeled Caroline away. He asked to go with her, but the doctor wanted to speak to him. Mr. Nash, detective, the doctor began. She's made it through so far, and that's a good sign. The bullet did very little damage internally. Her main problem is the deteriorated condition she was in to begin with. Severe dehydration and a knock to the back of her head. We're hydrating her through the IV, and I sent her for an MRI to make sure there's no injury to the brain. An hour later, Toby sat alone near Caroline in the intensive care unit, holding her hand, talking to her, willing her to open her eyes, when the doctor came in to check on her. What's her condition, Doc? Toby asked softly. Her condition is serious but stable. There is some slight swelling to the brain, but the brain itself is not damaged. Swelling? Can you do something about that? Well, if it were major swelling, it could cause brain damage and we would operate to relieve the pressure. However, this swelling is only slight and there's no reason to chance surgery. Could this slight swelling cause permanent damage? It could, but I doubt that. Right now, we just need to wait for her to come out of it, and then we'll see. Okay? So what now? We just wait? I'm afraid so. Give her some time to recover. The fluids will help. The bullet wound shouldn't be a problem. She's in good hands here. The doctor smiled kindly. Chin up. Does she have any other family? Toby shook his head. I'm it. There is no one else. The doctor nodded. Well, regardless, you have some visitors in the waiting room you might want to speak with. The doctor took his leave. Toby headed to the waiting room, and what he saw when he got there amazed him. He'd been incorrect when he told the doctor she had no other family. She had a very large family, large and diverse and dedicated and loyal. Jeff rose to greet his friend and put his arms around him. Toby hugged him hard and looked around at all the other expectant faces. There was Ace, Billy Bob, Eugene, Rosie, Irene, Alice, Madame Pierre, several regulars from the diner, a few fellow dance instructors, some of Caroline's theater friends, and even Evan, the lead singer from Crazy 88. Well, how is she? Rosie asked. Toby filled them in, giving the same information the doctor had given him. A woman Toby had never seen before approached him, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mr. Nash, about what my daughter has done. I don't expect you to be able to forgive her, and I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. She's been a difficult child, and I don't understand her. Toby closed his eyes a moment and took time to clear his throat. Caroline left a note, and part of that note asked me to forgive Sherry. So for her sake, for my Caroline's sake, I will, and I do. Caroline also mentioned in her note that Sherry's father had done things to her, and that Sherry needs counseling. I'm not sure if you're aware of these things or not. I just wanted you to know what Caroline said. The woman's lips trembled. I didn't know. Or maybe I was afraid to know. And now this has happened. Look, Toby comforted, I appreciate your coming here. I know it took a lot of courage, and now you need to be there for your daughter so the rest of her life won't be ruined. She nodded. I will. I promise. Jeff ushered Toby to a seat. Sit for a minute and let me get you something to drink, some coffee maybe. Toby conceded. Silently, he sat and began to pray. He prayed that God would give Caroline the strength to pull through. He prayed for healing. He prayed, he begged, he pleaded. Not one of Caroline's family members left. They stayed, knowing they probably wouldn't get to see her, yet still wanted to show their support. It was amazing to Toby how one small girl could touch so many people's lives. Toby was vaguely aware of more people filing into the room, but only looked up when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Uncle Jim? Toby rose to be enveloped by James and Sylvia Stillwater. How did you hear? Toby asked. How did you get here so quickly? James shook his head. We had no idea what was going on with you and Caro. We've been camping out near the Grand Canyon, doing the one with nature kind of thing, and if I'd known what you two had been going through, believe me, we would have been here for you. Sylvia took up where her husband left off. We left our camp yesterday, checked into a hotel last night, flipped on the TV, and there you were, headline news. I haven't paid any attention to it. What are they saying now? They're saying that your fiancé had been kidnapped, Sylvia said. Then they started in on all this background, which absolutely shocked me to the core. All this stuff about a murder and your arrest, and then Carol was arrested, and now this. It's all so crazy. Anyway, James continued, as soon as we heard, we started for New York. Once we got here, we were told Caroline had been found, but she'd been shot. We found out which hospital, and here we are. Is Carol okay, Toby? Sylvia asked. We don't know yet. Paul and Lynn and their parents listened intently to the crazy story that Toby told. So now it's a waiting game. He shook his head. It's killing me, thinking about what she must have been through. She wrote a message to me scratched into the concrete floor where she was held prisoner. At first it makes sense, but then it's obvious she was delirious. There were rhymes and disjointed thoughts and parts of songs. There was blood on the floor, and she drew petals around it, like a flower. She was so alone in the dark. He had to stop, and he rubbed his hands over his face, wiping the tears away. James Stillwater placed a hand on Toby's shoulder. Don't do this to yourself. Carol's a strong girl. She's a survivor. She'll pull through, I know it. You two haven't come all this way to be apart now. Toby nodded his head. Do your parents know? Sylvia asked. He shook his head. I haven't even thought of calling them. They already came back to the States once when I was in jail. There's nothing they can do now. Let them have their vacation. Toby, your mom and dad will be devastated if you don't call them and they find out some other way. Come on, let's give them a call. If nothing else, it will help to pass the time. Toby only had to think of the comfort his father would offer and made up his mind to call. His father had a way of putting everything into perspective, and this time was no exception. And when Toby hung up from his call, he admitted that his father's strength had indeed been just what he needed. He drew a deep breath, ready to face the world, and headed back to the room in the ICU. He arrived at the entrance to the room, and he almost didn't recognize her. The tiny, pale girl in the bed reminded him of the 12-year-old he'd fallen in love with long ago. Thin, abused, beaten down. His hand shook as he reached for hers, and pressing her frail fingers between his large hands, he willed her to get well. Hey, darling, he said softly. He waited, realized he'd give anything to have her open her eyes and smile at him, and when she didn't, he continued on. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that I'm here. I'll never leave your side again. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, Princess. It seems I never am when things get hard for you, but I'm going to try to change all that in the future. I read your message, the one on the floor. I will write a song about what happened to us, just like you asked, but it'll have a good ending. It won't be about a lost love. It'll be about me and you and how much we love each other and about how happy we are together and about going down to the pond and feeding the ducks and riding thunder and kissing on New Year's Eve. It will be about the children we will have someday and what a wonderful, loving mother you are, and it will be about the woman who can dance her way into anyone's heart. He lowered his head to her hand and kissed it. Dear God, I love her. She has to get well. Please. In Jesus' name. Toby cleared his throat and began to sing softly. He started with 4 days, then moved on to every other song he knew. It was when he started on Amazing Grace that his voice broke. It had been the first song she'd ever heard him sing. It didn't sound like much, but he made his way through it, and when he finished, he laid his head on their joint hands and fell asleep. New scene. Grace Watson sat in the nurse's station at 3 in the afternoon as she was briefed by Debbie, the morning duty nurse, in preparation for taking over her shift. The newest arrival, Caroline Jones, is a gunshot victim, dehydration, head injury. She hasn't regained consciousness yet. Debbie leaned forward. Listen to this. So, I go in to take care of her, and he's singing to her. He? He who? Don't you know? Our patient is Toby Nash's fiancée. They found her this morning. She'd been held hostage by some deranged teenage girl. Oh, yeah, I remember hearing something about that. Well, thank goodness they found her. It's nice to hear good news for a change. Whenever you hear about someone being kidnapped, the next thing you usually hear is their body was found in a ditch or a lake or something. Exactly. She's in bad shape, but she's alive and stable. So they say this Toby Nash is quite a looker, Grace murmured as she thumbed through some paperwork. They say? Grace, honey, you've got to get out more. He's drop dead gorgeous, but he's only got eyes for her. It's so sweet, Gracie. He hasn't left her side. Every time I go by, he's either talking to her or singing to her. I'll have to head down there and just see this guy for myself. You ever heard his song, Nothing But Lovin'? Does something to you right here, Debbie said, rubbing her midsection. Gets things all stirred up. That man can definitely sing, and he really loves her, you know? When he was singing to her, he was all choked up, and it got to me. It warms my heart to see he's for real. Well, I need to make my rounds and check her over, and then he can sing till his heart's content. I don't think his heart will be content until she wakes up and he knows she's all right, Debbie sighed. Grace halted just outside of Caroline's cubicle, taken by the one-sided conversation she overheard. And of course, you can pick out the wall color, but if you want my opinion, it should be something bright and sunny, 'cause that's how it looks when you smile. And if you want, we can put a dance floor right in the house, and we could enclose it in glass, sort of like a sunroom, and you can dance with the trees and the flowers all around. And he stopped as he noticed a nurse standing at the doorway. Sorry, didn't mean to intrude, Grace said. I need to check her over and change her bandage. She smiled at him. She'd been touched by his words and taken by his appearance. Such a large, strong man to speak such tender words, Grace thought. And beautiful. Was it possible for a man to be beautiful? Now she understood what Debbie meant. Toby rose and stood back while the nurse checked her vitals and adjusted the IV fluids being used to hydrate her. Mr. Nash, would you like to step out while I change the bandage? I want to stay, he said softly. I promised her I wouldn't leave her side. I won't get in the way. Grace nodded. Oh, you're not in the way. Some people are a little squeamish, so just so you know, if you faint, I won't be able to catch you, she said with a smile. He smiled back. I think I'll be okay. Toby watched as Grace examined the dressing on Caroline's side. Carefully, she removed the dressing, exposing an angry red and purple wound. As she worked on the area, Caroline winced, gaining their immediate attention, and Toby stroked her cheek. And Grace spoke to her. Am I bothering you, sweetie? You want me to leave you alone, huh? Well, just open your eyes and tell me to stop. Come on, Miss Caroline. Open your eyes and tell mean old Grace to leave you alone. Toby sighed heavily as he realized there would be no further response. He watched Grace work and appreciated her quick, precise movements. You've been a nurse for a long time? Oh, I've been in the ICU for the past 7 years, and before that, I worked emergency OR for 12 years. I've seen it all. Why did you move to ICU? She shrugged. I have a way of getting attached to my patients. I had one woman in the OR, emergency C-section, but she was okay, and she and the baby were just fine, and we moved them up to maternity, but the wards were brimming over, and the nurses short-staffed, and she developed toxemia. Grace paused. She died. Senseless. Absolutely senseless. She shrugged and stopped to clear her throat. We helped her through the most dangerous part, then had her die upstairs when she should have been okay. I moved to ICU because I have this need to make sure the other patients were getting the appropriate care. Patients like your Caroline here who need to be monitored carefully. You're a good woman. He looked for her name tag. Grace Watson. She shrugged again. We're nurses because we want to help people. She smiled. It's sure not for the money. Toby sighed. Have you ever seen anyone stay unconscious this long? Has she slipped into some kind of coma? She smiled at him. Coma is such a scary word. Caroline's body is closed down for a while to rest while she recovers, that's all. The head injury is the main reason, and yes, to answer your question, I've seen patients stay asleep for 3 or 4 days and wake up good as new. So don't you worry. Thank you, Toby said softly, and thanks for taking such good care of her. Grace offered him some words of encouragement and left the room, but returned a few minutes later with a blanket and pillow. That chair leans back, she explained. You need rest too, so here's a blanket and pillow for later. And now, some of your friends down in the waiting room are asking about Caroline. I'll stay with her if you want to go down for a minute or two and fill them in. There's a few who will want to see her. Would that be okay? Grace hesitated. You see, she has no family. I mean, they're really the only family she has. She nodded. Only two at a time and no noise. Yes, ma'am, Toby agreed. Are all you Southern boys so polite? She asked to help lighten his mood. Oh, no, ma'am. Some are downright ornery. She laughed. That sounds like my kind of men. New scene. In the waiting room, Caroline's extended family gathered around to hear about her condition. They were disheartened to find she was still unconscious, and those who wanted to go in to see her immediately began pairing up to go back to her room. Jeff laid a hand on Toby's shoulder. The detectives were called off on another case, but said to tell you they would check back with you later. Evan approached and shook Toby's hand. I got to be going, Toby. I was in town and heard what happened. I just wanted to come by to let you know I'm here for you. The other guy said to give you and Caroline their best. I hope she's going to be okay, man. Thanks for coming by, Evan. I was amazed to see you here, even though I didn't get to speak with you earlier. No sweat, man. You got friends everywhere. You're one of the good guys, even if you do sing that country crap. If the truth were known, I was really here to steal your musicians while you weren't looking. Toby smiled. I don't blame you for that. They're the best. Well, at least we agree on that. His smile faded. Take care, man. Toby nodded at him as his cell phone went off. Yeah, he said softly into the receiver. Toby? Ricky Keno. I heard what happened. How is she? She's alive, but still out. She'll pull through, man. I hope you're right. She will. I just have a feeling. She's such a good person, Rick, you know? Ricky drew a breath. I'm going to tell you something, Toby, and you can take it or leave it. It's something my father taught me, and it's going to sound all airy-fairy, but if you open your mind, you'll realize the truth of it. He stopped and waited for Toby's response. Well, if you're going to help me to make sense of this, I'm all ears. Well, what happens to us, for us, around us, is what we attract to ourselves. She did this, or you did. What the hell? Let me finish before you go berserk, and if you want to go around with me next time you see me, that's okay too. Silently breathing, Toby waited. We may not mean to attract it. You see, God has a plan. God has a plan. That's the same thing your pastor friend said. Oh, he's right. Nothing is random. God's universe is ordered. Part of his plan is to help us grow and learn. I say just part because I don't know all of his plan. Whatever lesson we need to learn, it works out that how we vibrate is what attracts whatever to us. Vibrate? Toby questioned. I'm not asking you to believe any crazy way out stuff. Scientists have proven that everything, every single thing, is made up of particles of energy that vibrate at a certain speed. Some things, like a dense rock, vibrate very slowly, and their vibration rarely changes. Living things are a little different. Their vibrations change. Flowers in full bloom have a high energy vibration, while wilted flowers or cut flowers have a much slower vibration. Puppies and kittens have a high vibration. People, however, have the advantage of actually being able to monitor and change their vibrations, if they know how. Now, here's the crux. Like attracts like. So, whatever you're vibrating, you're attracting the same type of vibrations to you. And people who are very positive and constantly happy attract other people and situations to them of the same type vibrations, and therefore their happiness increases. The thing is, most people fluctuate, drawing a little of everything to their lives. Caroline drew you, and you drew her, like vibrations. But let me ask you a question, and forgive me for being bold, but Shelley told me a little bit about Caroline. She believes Caroline was abused as a child. She was. It colored her life up until now. What you just said is exactly what I'm talking about. She's known abuse. She remembers it. She vibrates it. Maybe not all the time, but enough to continue to bring things of that same vibration into her life. Tell me, does it seem bad things are always happening to her? I know what's happened over the past few months. Do you wonder why she's always coming up against abusive situations? Well, I have wondered that. I actually discussed that very thing with a friend not long ago. With your friend, too. You're talking about Matt again? Yes. Well, if I'm telling you the same things he's already told you, that means it hasn't sunk in yet. Okay. God does have a plan for you and for your girl, and he wants her to lift herself out of her abusive mindset. Well, how is she supposed to do that? If he's so powerful, why doesn't he do it for her? Ever seen a baby bird trying to peck out of its shell? Yeah. It looks like a long, slow, hard process. But you don't help it, right? Toby sighed as he realized the point Kina was making. Right, because it's the process of its working its way out of the shell that makes the bird strong. Exactly, man. So, maybe when Caroline comes out of this, she'll be so happy and grateful to be alive that she'll attract happier things to herself. And really, that same thing might go for you and all of us who care about you and Caroline. God's plan usually affects more than just the people he's working through. His wisdom always amazes me. He's truly awesome. You know, I haven't thought much about God at all until Caroline came into my life. I mean, back into my life. You see? God is using her. Anyway, Toby, just think about what I've said. You don't have to accept it right away. Just try to be aware of it. Even more, you and Caroline let go of the things that cause you hurt and pain and focus on the more positive side of life. I think you'll see that it makes sense. I think I already see. Well, the joy of the Lord is your strength, it says in the Bible, Ricky quoted. There are thousands of passages, Bible quotes, and wise sayings that expound on the importance of having a joyful countenance. It's just that no one has ever explained the science behind it until recently. Toby thought for a moment before he spoke. Your words make a lot of sense, Rick, and I actually feel strangely comforted, like everything is going to be okay. It is. I prayed for you guys and had a strong feeling of peace come over me. I know things will work out for your good and hers. Again, that's the same thing Matt said, almost exactly the same. Well, God is faithful and true. I appreciate you taking the time to help me to make sense of all this. Toby, you need anything at all, let me know. In the meantime, we'll be sending positive thoughts and prayers your way. Thanks, Rick. And like I say, you need to go around with me to work out some of that frustration. I'll gladly oblige. It would take more than one round. And no offense, Toby, but you wouldn't make more than one round with me, Ricky laughed. Oh, just a heads up. Bree and Shelley are all up in arms and talking about flying out there, so you can probably expect them by tomorrow. Well, that's really not necessary. I've learned not to stand in Shelley's nor Bree's way when they have their mind set on something. Anyway, I'll let you go. Remember, Toby, all is well. Really. Thanks. He ended the call and glanced up to see Madame Pierre, shaken and pale. He went to her quickly. Madam? Toby took her by the arm. Please, come sit down. You don't look very well. She let him lead her to one of the vacated chairs. Aunt Sylvia, Toby called softly, would you mind getting some water? I wouldn't mind at all. I need to do something. This waiting is driving me out of my mind. She ran to do his bidding. Madam, you're not well? She wiped away a tear before she spoke. Nonsense. I'm healthy as a horse. But my Caroline, I'm worried about my Caroline. Have you been up to see her yet? Not yet. I thought I would let everyone else go up to see her first. I don't want to appear to be a hog. Toby smiled. No wonder Caroline loves you so much. The woman nodded. Ah, my little one. She is like a daughter to me. I try to stay out of her life, try not to be so overbearing, and I try not to be hurt when I'm not the first to know something that has happened in her life. After all, she's not really my daughter. We? She shook her head, but this has been so hard, so hard. Tell me the truth, Toby. Do you think she's going to be okay? Remembering Rick's admonition, he nodded. I can think nothing else, madam. I don't dare think any other way. Aunt Sylvia brought the water to madam, bent over her, and patted her back. Toby looked up at you as Eugene and Rosie came back into the room after their visit with Caroline. Toby and Jeff leaned down and helped madam to her feet. Come on, let's go see her. Toby and Jeff stood outside the door while madam had time with Caroline. Toby could see through the small glass window and watched as madam held Caroline's hand and prayed over her. Madame Pierre stroked her little one's cheek, whispering to her lovingly, encouraging her to be strong. You must never give up, mon cher. Your handsome man, he is so worried. But he waits patiently for you to take the time you need to get well. But madam, your madam does not have so much patience. So for me, you will hurry up. No? She kissed Caroline's forehead. Madam joined Toby outside the room while Jeff took his turn visiting Caroline. Hey, kid, Jeff said casually. Look, it's been a blast and all, but I'm ready for this gig to be over. And I don't know how much more Toby can take. I want you to buck up and come out of this. Besides, I've decided I want a rematch on that poker game. You owe me. Now get better. He bent and kissed her cheek. Toby continued watching as more of Caroline's friends came to visit her. It seemed kind of spooky, as if they were saying goodbye one last time. Consciously, he let that thought go. He knew they were encouraging her and letting her know how much they cared. The Stillwaters were the last of the visitors. They stayed with her a longer time, and Jeff insisted Toby use the time to eat something before he went back in to spend the night with Caroline. When Toby and Jeff returned from the hospital cafeteria, the remaining visitors said their goodbyes. Jeff left too, but returned 30 minutes later. Here, I thought you might need this, he said, holding out Toby's guitar. Toby accepted gratefully, looking his friend over. You're soaking wet. Yeah, it's pouring out there, big time, severe thunderstorm warnings. Sort of fits the way I feel. Toby started to agree and stopped himself, again thinking of what Ricky had said and realizing that it was truly easy to let negative thoughts and emotions take over. He held up the guitar and smiled. Thanks, man. Toby turned his attention to Caroline. He looked her over, his mind wandering back to the year they'd met. From the beginning, he'd known there was something special about her. He'd wanted to save her then, and he sure as heck wanted to save her now. And with her eyes closed, her face seemed remarkably peaceful. Her adorable mouth, the way it was drawn up, appeared to be smiling as she slept. He ran a finger down her turned-up nose, over her lips to her cute little chin. Soft. How could she be so soft and so strong? He thought of the way she'd taken care of Paul and Lynn Stillwater way back when, and the way she is now, always working, cleaning, rehearsing, practicing, teaching. Up before the break of dawn every day, never complaining, always cheerful. He sighed. Hey, darling. Well, you've had quite a day, haven't you? All your friends have come to see you. I suppose you're pretty tired. You've been through a lot, but I know you're going to be just fine. I'm going to stay right here with you, Princess. You sleep and get well, and I'll be right here. I was thinking maybe you'd like to hear a song, and I've got the guitar this time so it will sound a little better. He strummed a few times and tuned the strings and strummed again. Here's one you might remember. It was one of my first hits. He began to play and sing softly, hoping he wasn't about to get himself kicked out of the room. The tune was sweet, his voice sweeter, as he sang about the good things in life and how we sometimes don't appreciate them until it's too late. How appropriate. He glanced up to see Grace enter the room, but when he stopped playing, she smiled and nodded and told him to go on, and he did. One by one, more nurses filed into the room and gathered just outside. He continued to sing for a long time, and finally he set the guitar down. I hope I didn't disturb y'all too much, he said in apology. Grace patted his arm. There's no way in this world you could disturb anyone with that beautiful voice of yours, and we want your girl to respond to you as much as you do. But you do need to rest now. I will. He smiled at the stern look she gave him. I promise. Grace took Caroline's vitals, checked the IV, looked her over, and made notes on the computer before she left the room. Toby took Caroline's hand. Well, I'll be right here if you wake up and want to talk. I love you, Caroline. I love you so much. I know I keep saying that same thing, and it doesn't sound like much, but I swear I mean it from the bottom of my heart. He stood and bent over the rail to place a kiss on her mouth. She was warm and sweet, and he'd give anything to have her respond to him. Sighing, he sat in the chair, pushed it back into the reclining position, and closed his eyes. New scene. The blip, blip, blip. The blip, blip, blip of the monitor had become a lullaby of sorts for Toby as he slept. It took several long moments when the tiny, short bursts of sound became one long, horrible note for it to register on Toby's sleeping brain. Finally, though, it did register, about the time doctors and nurses burst through the door of the room. Toby sprang to his feet, his hand still holding Caroline's. He was literally shoved out of the way as nurses and doctors crowded around the bed. He realized what was happening, even though his mind and heart denied it. He searched for Grace's face, and she was deadly pale, her mouth moving as she spoke to her patient, her hand obeying the doctor's orders as they worked to save the woman that meant life to him. Why was this happening? Caroline was stripped to the waist. Someone held paddles in the air. Clear, they yelled just before they placed the paddles on her chest. Her body buckled, and the room became eerily quiet for a few seconds, but the monitor continued its monotone. Flatline, that's what it's called, Toby remembered. Flatline. No, Toby uttered quietly. Oh, God, please don't let her die. Everything was happening so fast. Someone shot an enormously long needle into Caroline's chest. The man with the paddles called clear. Again and again they were placed against Caroline's skin. Again and again her body buckled with the force. Nothing. Nothing. Toby looked on in horror. Why? Why? What lesson was this supposed to teach him? They were folding up the railings on the bed, throwing the IV bag onto her stomach and rushing her out of the room. Toby followed in a daze, but was stopped by the operating room door, which was firmly closed in his face. He leaned his forehead against the door and waited. The morning light began to filter through the corridors of the hospital. Toby had imagined the morning would bring him relief and Caroline's smile. He'd never thought he would be waiting outside an operating room while they tried to bring Caroline back from death. She was gone. He knew it. So when the doctor approached him, a strained look on his face, he really didn't have to speak the words, for Toby knew what he would say. I'm sorry, Mr. Nash. We weren't able to save her. She was too weak, and her heart just gave out. What could he be saying? She was not weak. Caroline was the strongest person he knew. Toby was watching the doctor's face as he spoke. He could see his mouth moving. He could feel the impact of his words, but his world was silent. Silent except for the roar in his ears and the unbelievable pain in his heart. And he staggered, and someone was there helping him to sit, and he looked up to see his father's concerned face. Dad? Yes, son, I'm here. She's gone, Dad. I know. His strong hand rested on his son's back. I know. I can't stand it. His voice broke. Everything's going to be all right, his father comforted. No, Dad. Nothing will ever be all right again. Never. Toby rose in a fit of anger and pain and stormed around the hall, cursing and swearing and promising that he will never get over the loss of his Caroline. And he ran out of steam in the midst of the tirade and sank to the floor in despair. Come on now, Mr. Nash, a soft female voice called to him from far away. Come on. Startled, he glanced around. He sat beside Caroline's bed, his hand still holding hers, the monitor blipping merrily to the tune of Caroline's heart. A dream. He'd been having a dream, and relief washed over him in giant waves again and again. He smiled broadly up at Grace and stood and hugged her and then bent to kiss Caroline. Well now, it's good to see you too, Grace chuckled. He put his hand to his head and shook it. I had a dream, a horrible dream, and oh, never mind, I don't want to say it, don't even want to think it. It's just that it seemed so real. Grace smiled. I think I understand. I just stopped in to say goodbye. Debbie will be in at 7. I stayed past my shift to make sure Caroline was going to be okay. But I've got to get home and get some sleep. Deb will be here until I get back at 3. You stayed for 2 shifts? Almost 2. I'm going home to get some rest. You stayed for Caroline? The woman shrugged. It's no big deal. Like I said, sometimes I get a little attached. I don't know how to thank you. There's no need for thanks, Mr. Nash. It's my job. I do it because I want to. Well, at least stop calling me Mr. Nash. It's Toby to my friends. Grace patted his arm. Then Toby it is. She turned to Caroline and rubbed her leg. Why don't you be a good girl and surprise me when I get back with a great big smile, okay? Toby smiled down at his sleeping princess as Grace left the room. There it was again, the relief. She was alive and getting better with each passing minute. The dream had put so much into perspective. She was alive, and he was grateful. The dream seemed to have helped him to release his fears, and man, oh man, what a dream. Humming, he went into the bathroom to freshen up. Debbie and the other day shift nurses listened as the night nurses briefed them on the condition of the patients being left in their care. One handed her a handwritten page. It was from Grace. "You missed the concert, Deb. He played his guitar and sang, and I was never that much into country, but I think I could be a fan." Debbie grumbled about missing the concert before she settled herself to review Caroline's chart. She skimmed over the lab results from the latest blood test and stopped short, her heart pounding. Had they missed this yesterday? Or did they not run the test yesterday? And all the excitement of finding Caroline and Toby Nash being here, had they simply missed it? Or did they neglect to share the information? She blinked and looked closer to make sure she was seeing what she was seeing. "Oh, my," she uttered, and then paged Dr. Silvers. New scene. Toby looked up when someone knocked softly on the door. Lieutenant Varanza and Sergeant Summers entered quietly. "Toby," they nodded in greeting. He stood to shake their hands. "How's she doing?" "She seems fine. Stable, they call it." "We thought you'd like to hear about the case," Lieutenant Varanza began. "We'll talk here," Toby instructed. "I'm not leaving her." He nodded. "We went to see Tracy Chastain." "Really? When?" "Actually, we'd just come back the morning you came to us about Caroline missing. We just haven't had a good time to talk to you about it." And she killed George Mancini. She admitted it." "Go on." "She went to see Caroline that morning to tell her she wasn't really pregnant." "I knew that," Toby said. "I knew I'd been careful. I'm always careful." "Yes, well, she surprised George, who we suppose decided Tracy would do for his needs since Caroline wasn't there. She pushed him. He slipped on the bat, hit his head on the radiator. After he fell, she ran. She didn't know he died until later. She said she would have come forward if you or Caroline had gone to trial." "Yeah, I bet," Toby grunted. "Well, don't be bitter, son. She was confused and scared. Scared of her father, too. It took courage on her part to face her father and tell him to back off while she did what was right for a change." "Well, what will happen to her then? I mean, it sounds like an accident to me." "She appeared before the grand jury. Her statement matches the forensic evidence. They dismissed the case. Sherry, on the other hand, will not fare so well." Toby looked down. "Caroline wanted us to go easy on her." "I understand that, and I'm doing everything possible to help her. Sherry is a sick little girl, and they've charged her with kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon. And she's a minor, so she's being held in a facility farther uptown." "Yeah, well, don't let Mac anywhere near her." "Mac, by the way, has been disciplined and transferred to a desk job where he won't be able to cause any more damage. If you want to bring charges, I'll understand." Toby shook his head. "No harm, no foul. So what will happen with Sherry?" "It depends on when Caroline opens her eyes. Caroline will be able to do a great deal to help her. She needs to be in a hospital where she'll receive the counseling and care she needs." "Caroline will open her eyes soon. I'm sure of it," Toby said. "Good. And when she does, she will be frightened to see a big, hairy bear standing over her. You look terrible. You need to go back to the hotel, shower, shave, and put on some clean clothes." Toby nodded. "I will, eventually." "See that you do," they said as they took their leave. Jeff was the next to arrive, breakfast in hand. As he ate, he filled Jeff in on what transpired during the night. Their conversation ended when the doctor and Debbie entered the room. Jeff excused himself. "I need to make some calls. Be back in a while. And I think I'll bring you a razor, because you look like really bad." "So I've been told." Toby turned his attention to the doctor as he examined Caroline. "What is it? Is there a problem?" Dr. Silvers nodded at him. "Let me finish and we'll talk." Toby watched as the doctor shone a light in Caroline's eyes, listened to her heart and lungs, examined the small wound on her side, then moved down to the end of the bed, ushering Toby toward the head. Debbie stood beside the doctor as he put on latex gloves. She helped to move Caroline's leg out of the way and hold the catheter in place. Toby winced along with Caroline as the doctor examined her, using his free hand to push down on her abdomen slightly below the navel. "Well?" Toby asked. "Is something wrong?" "Did you know she's pregnant?" "What? She's pregnant?" "Well, that answers my question." She can't be. I mean, there's only been one time. Well, one time is all it takes, the doctor assured him. Toby nodded sheepishly. Of course he knew that, which was why he was always so careful. How far along is she? Well, since you say there's only been one time, suppose you tell me. Well, we were back at the farm. I was trying to take things slow, but we were on a horse, and he went on to tell what enticed him to make love while sitting on a horse, and Toby looked up at the strangled sound coming from Nurse Debbie, and his face reddened. I don't see how it's possible, Deb mumbled. He smiled and shrugged. It was a very big horse. And again, how long ago was, the doctor paused, trying to keep a straight face, was the horse adventure? Back at the end of May. The doctor nodded his head. That sounds about right. She's about 6 or 7 weeks in. You're absolutely sure? Toby asked. Well, she is definitely pregnant. Debbie finished tending to her patient after the doctor took his leave, and when Toby was alone again with Caroline, he leaned over her, stroking her face. I don't know what to say. The doctor has just given me some wonderful news, but it won't be wonderful at all if you don't wake up. I hope it makes you happy. I know you're worried that you won't be a good mother, but I'm not worried a bit, and you're the most loving person I've ever known. You asked me to forgive the one who did this to you. What does that tell you? You have much more patience and love in your heart than most people. He sighed in frustration. Wake up, Caroline. But she did not wake up. During the morning, the Stillwaters came again to visit Caroline, and while they were there, Jeff talked Toby into coming back to the hotel with him and getting cleaned up. He did so reluctantly, worrying that she would wake while he was gone. Toby did feel much better once he'd taken care of himself. And when Grace arrived at work, Debbie pulled her aside immediately. You are not going to believe what we found out this morning. Is Caroline okay? She's the same, only not the same. What are you talking about? Deb pulled out the chart and pointed, and Grace's mouth fell open. Pregnant? Debbie giggled. Yes, pregnant. Tell her about the horse, one of the other nurses prodded. The horse? Grace patiently listened to the nurses' gossip. She pretended haughtiness and reminded them that they were professionals. Only her red face couldn't be hidden. On a horse, she muttered, as she went to check on her patients. Unfortunately, the afternoon went along very similarly to the previous day, and late that evening, Toby found himself saying goodnight to Caroline once again, asking her to come back to him, asking her to get well, asking God for his mercy. He was tired and frustrated and completely distraught as he fell into a fitful sleep. New scene. Awareness seeped slowly into Caroline's brain. She no longer lay on a concrete floor. She was sure of that. No bed she'd ever been in seemed as soft as the one she was in now. She stirred slightly, pressing her body against the mattress to feel the softness, but got something else in return. Pain. It shot through her, convincing her to be still. As her body continued the waking process, she became more aware of how uncomfortable she was. Her head ached, it throbbed. The pain in her side was agonizing. She could hear the blip of a monitor, and she reasoned she was in a hospital. Slowly her eyes opened, confirming her location. And peering through the dim light, she lifted her left hand to look at the IV needle. She panicked at first when she tried to lift her other hand and couldn't. Carefully, she turned her head to look down at her hand. Toby. His head lay on her hand as he slept by her bed. Wiggling her fingers against his cheek produced no reaction. She tried to speak, but her throat was so dry nothing would come forth. Again she wiggled her fingers, contracting her hand, and she smiled as she heard him gasp and raise his head. Caroline? He rose and leaned over her, and she blinked up at him, smiling. Caroline, he said, unashamed as tears filled his eyes immediately. He wanted to scoop her up in a giant bear hug, but restrained himself. Instead, he gently stroked her cheek. How do you feel? She shook her head and tried to speak. Nothing came out but a dry, croaking sound. Water, she finally whispered. You need water, of course you do. He reached for the mug of ice chips. Carefully, he held a piece of ice to her parched lips. Better? He asked. She smiled and nodded. Oh, Caroline, you don't know how good it is to see you open your eyes. I was so worried. First, because I couldn't find you. And then, when we did, well, let's just say I was scared. We all were. All? She whispered. Yes, all. Your family hogged the entire waiting room. You are a very popular lady. I have no family, she whispered. Is that what you think? You just don't know. She frowned. What about you, Toby? You look terrible. Are you okay? He rubbed his hand over Day's growth of beard. I suppose I do look pretty bad. You should have seen me before I cleaned up. But I don't feel terrible. I feel like I could dance and sing and fly. She winced as a new wave of pain hit. What is it? Are you hurting? My head, it feels like a bass drum is pounding in my brain, and my side hurts, and her eyes opened wide. I just remembered. The gun went off. Sherry. What happened to Sherry? Toby pressed his lips together in a tight line. I'm not sure. Lieutenant Varanza will be by later today, and we can ask him. I know she's in a lot of trouble, but will be much better since you've pulled through. They'll probably get you to speak for her at a hearing, but you don't worry about anything right now except getting well. She raised her hand to her head and moaned softly. I'll get the nurse. Hold on, baby. Grace arrived at Caroline's room in only seconds. Well, now, Grace sang sweetly to her patient. It's good to see you with your eyes open. You're not feeling too good, though, are you? Caroline moved her head from side to side. Grace smoothed Caroline's hair back. I'm going to talk to the doctor and get you a little something for pain, but we don't want to give you too much because of the... She looked quickly up at Toby. She doesn't know yet, he confirmed. What don't I know? Caroline asked softly, too weak to show the irritation she felt. Toby leaned close. It's a miracle, really. You and me. We're going to have a baby. A baby? Yes, Caroline, you're pregnant. He waited for a response and worried about her reaction. A tear spilled over and ran down her cheek. Are you unhappy? He asked. She shook her head. I thought I'd never see you again. When I was stuck in that place, I worried so much about how you would handle my death. I know how I would feel if the situation had been reversed, and I was so worried about you, and I swore that if I ever got out of that room, I would never let useless worries and all the stupid stuff get in the way ever again. I love you so much, Toby, and I'm just grateful that I'm alive to carry your child, our child. You're right. It's a miracle. Oh, Caroline, Toby uttered, kissing her cheek. Well, children, I suppose I'll leave you to each other, Grace said. Will the baby be okay? Caroline asked before Grace could leave. I mean, with all the trauma and being shot and the kidney infection, will the baby be affected? Grace smiled. Your baby's just fine. The bullet hit only some soft tissue and muscle. Your baby's fine, and you are fine, and your man is fine, and this sounds like a very happy ending now, doesn't it? Yes, it does, Caroline agreed. Just don't go riding horses any time soon, Grace added, with a wink toward Toby. His mouth opened, his face reddened, he shook his head. Oh, Toby, Caroline laughed. Have you been bragging to the nurses? Bragging? I don't know what I'd be bragging about. Well, I do, Caroline giggled. Shut up and kiss me, Toby ordered. And that is the end of chapter 16.